Hello, lovely podcast people. I hope you are well. I hope you enjoyed the first part of this guest podcast series with Steve Hall. It's a two-part series. In this episode, in this part of the podcast, there's more discussion around genetics, but also a lot of discussion about bowel movements. So apologies if that makes you a bit squeamish, but I feel like some really interesting stuff that maybe isn't discussed elsewhere so openly and honestly, transparently, with hopefully some insightful stuff in there. As I said, more stuff about genetics. Steve quizzes me on a very tricky area, which is around the use of refeeds and diet breaks when people have physique goals, when they are dieting for fat loss for prolonged periods. And then a final discussion, I suppose, around, aggressive dieting and the use of refeeds there. And actually, I guess, a bit of an insight into the second iteration, or probably the final iteration, of my fat loss calculator 2.0, basically the culmination of every sort of the stuff I've been working on there to try and get something that works for everyone at every, end of the spectrum of starting body fat and being able to use an aggressive dieting strategy without losing muscle, being able to retain lean body mass, particularly myofibrillar proteins. But anyway, again, I hope you enjoy me bringing you these sort of guest podcast episodes. I do talk a lot in them. I hope, they're these longer episodes that I know some of you love. But yeah, it'll be back to me from next week. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this. Much love.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today we have part 2 with Martin McDonald, where we're going to be talking more about the efficacy of refeeds and diet breaks for general fat loss and contest prep. As always, guys, if you do enjoy the podcast, be sure to leave us a rating wherever you're listening to the podcast, or if you're on YouTube, please drop us a comment, a like, a subscribe. It's always really appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into the show. But it's very interesting for me because I would say I'm that spendthrift phenotype who I just get hot and sweaty when I'm in a mass, and I just fidget and I want to move all the time. And also feces related, I much prefer when I'm dieting because it's just better time on the toilet, less time on the toilet. Whereas when I go into a surplus, I'm just it upregulates a lot, and I have to have a lot of calories to what you'd expect of someone of my size and activity to gain weight.
And I didn't actually finish my sentence there, so thank you so much for bringing that up. That when I sort of said dieting, and then you're going, obviously you're taking in less food volume, but there's also, so this is where my initial hypothesis started way, way, way back, was, well, there's this much longer transit time through the gut. Is the body able to digest more? We've got the fermentation of fibers, which we can then get these short chain fatty acids, which have a caloric load, and then we can absorb those into the small in the large intestine. So, but then you go on a massing phase. And, I won't say who, because it's just talking about someone else's bowel habits, but essentially said, go bulk and whatever. But literally going to the toilet, 3 to 5 times a day for a bowel movement. But not, not like they're not consuming 10,000 calories a day, just like a good surplus, but eating exactly as you've said, eating far more calories than you think should be necessary to gain a certain amount of weight. And there are other reasons, but I'm very much of the, and these studies, hopefully they are being done. There's some new 2020 onward studies looking at some of this stuff. And, I'm just thinking, and with this individual that I was mentioning there, I said, you know what, finding ways that you can, don't add more oats, just add stuff that requires no real digestive effort. So drinking a maltodextrin shake, for instance, like during your gym session, consume 400 plus calories of, it's just 100 grams ish of maltodextrin, which, is digested like that. It's pretty much pure glucose. The reason being, when you're bulking, it's like, oh, I'm gonna drink this sugar water, I feel sick, I already hate the sight of food, I don't want more. It's just like drinking water. The maltodextrin, because of the bonds it takes, that's, it's not impacting your sweet receptor in the same way. So you're just drinking water. So cool, I've just consumed 400 calories without noticing, and it's not led to any greater digestive load. And so little things like that, then it's like, oh, is there a way we can improve absorption? Can we look at digestive enzymes? Maybe it's just the body. So, there's lots of stuff that, on a one-to-one practitioner, if I was working with someone, I might do, but I wouldn't go and tell everyone on the internet do this, because then it'd be like, where's your evidence? Can you provide a randomized control trial? But it's like, people have sort of heard it there. They can go and ponder themselves what they might do. But yeah, that thanks for bringing that up, because that's the situation of, you go from not going to the toilet, you're going every 1 to 4 days, to then going 1 to 4 times a day. It's a big difference. And the amount of food volume isn't that great, because what do we all do when we're dieting? We increase fiber, we increase high fibrous foods, we increase food volume. But yet, even with all of that broccoli you're eating or whatever, which I then, who eats that much? I can just remember like kilos, just a kilo of broccoli, yum. and then get some salt on there. Oh, this is so tasty. Like, what the hell? I'm so glad I'm not one of them anymore. So I'm not eating that when I'm bulking, but yet your bowel movements are more frequent. And so and transit time is much less. So there, for me, there's all of these different areas of why, gaining weight, losing weight, there's such a dynamic system with different changes. It isn't just NEAT, which everyone discusses. It's this, consumption, absorption, or digestion, absorption, and then storage, and then the impact up and down of, some people diet and they move less. Some people don't move too much less. Some people's appetites go through the roof. Some people's don't do that as much, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many parts of this equation that are all really our genetics, that are kind of the sort of underpinning of that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And I think I'm glad you really expanded on this subject, because I think it just tells people like, yeah, I'm not just saying genetics impact these things. It's like there's research, and we're seeing it influence many areas of kind of this area. And a question I would have, I guess, just to finalize this question for me, obviously, like you or me, we're not going to be playing basketball like in the NBA, for example, because you have to be a certain height to just qualify however hard we work, or we're never going to be Usain Bolt however we train. Yeah. But as a bodybuilder who's trying to get stage condition, lines in their glutes, whatever, do you think like it's just a case of like you might find it harder than someone else, but you can work hard enough so you can eventually get there, assuming you have sufficient muscle mass?
Yeah, I thought you might ask this question. So I think just a couple of things on this. One is, obviously, in the bodybuilding world, people have these words of like the quality of the muscle, and it's like people use that term, and it's like you can just say it on a bodybuilding forum. People just know, but then you say it in research and they go, sorry, what? Which, like, are you sort of qualitatively interviewing your myofibrillar proteins to see if they're like, is he a quality guy or is he a bit of a not quality guy? Like, what does that mean? So there's there's elements of this in like people's structural makeup. Okay, we talk about like the origins and insertions of their muscle. We talk about like even just absolute muscle mass. And then I think I saw it might have been Alberto Nunez said something about kind of like as he aged, he was sort of noticing, I don't know if it was him, so sorry if I'm misquoting you, Alberto, but it was like the thinness of the skin, of his skin. It was just like his aged skin was just then being able to bring him this like new sort of granite look.
That is a definite said thing. I'm sure Alberto's talked about it. He may not have said exactly that, but something to that.
And you know, we know that aging skin, like the kind of collagen levels in it, elasticity, like different elements of skin change over time as part of the aging process. We know that. And again, if you've got more muscle in an area, being able to see greater levels of detail. And so, you know, like for instance, striated glutes, like one person's striated glute will look slightly different to another's. A bit like abs. It's like, oh, I've got a 6-pack, I've got an 8-pack or whatever. And this is based on the ligaments between these different muscles. So if we're literally talking about levels of leanness, it comes down to, I have a quote on a slide somewhere that is something like, and it's not about bodybuilders, but it's something like, at some point, expecting, I can't remember it now, actually, this is annoying, but essentially the point I was trying to get across is, with some clients, forget bodybuilders, at some point, it's the definition of insanity, you know, quoting kind of Einstein, to just keep trying to do the same thing and expect a different result, in that at a point of dieting, my appetite gets so high as a member of the general public, and my genetics mean that my, you know, fecal content of energy is down next to zero. I'm absorbing every calorie of every food I eat, and I feel tired, and metabolically, like I have, my libido is absolutely shot, and I'm completely fatigued, and I don't want to move around because I feel all of these things. And then going, you know, let's just keep pushing hard. Let's just drop calories a bit more. And someone yo-yos. To believe that something different is going to happen is insanity, unless you're changing something in your system. So, but when we talk about bodybuilders, leanness is just an energy dependent process. Like if you starve yourself long enough, you will lose body fat. And like, disclaimer at this point, I'm not recommending this. Like I think you are a very pragmatic, logical kind of guy who acts with integrity, in that, you know, I'm sure with your clients, you sometimes have to have honest conversations with them of, this is getting, you know, we're pushing this envelope hard here. But, you know, you're asking me whatever it is, an ivory tower question of like, can everyone? It's like, yeah, if you starve yourself, your body will eventually lose that body fat. It's whether or not you can maintain any training intensity in the gym. It's whether or not you can mentally do it, because so many issues, you know, the starved brain starts to push us towards, I don't know if the word psychosis is appropriate, although it is used in, you know, the Minnesota starvation study. I'm fairly sure psychosis is literally the prognosis in that situation. So yes, it can happen, but in an ivory tower discussion, but pragmatically speaking, the wheels may just fall off the wagon before someone gets there, in that they mess their relationship with food up so bad that whether they're honest with their coach or with themselves, they're binging. I'm just going to do a refeed. This was me. I was doing refeeds. Oh, back then they were called cheat meals and cheat days, because no one told me that that's moronic and terrible. And you know, and they weren't calorie counted or whatever. You put my cheat meal or cheat day calories and you spread it over my other 7, and I was on super low calories here, and you average it out, and I was just eating at maintenance for like the last 6 weeks of my diet. But I was trying really freaking hard, but I was lying to myself / anyone who was giving me any advice was a moron back then. So yeah, it's, in answer to your question, yeah, I guess everyone can get there. Everyone has muscle mass. Everyone has, glutes that look a certain way. If you cut someone open, a cadaver open, we all have those bits in our body. And you just lose enough body fat and you'll be there. It's just that for some people, it's just going to become insanely hard in terms of how badly they metabolically adapt. And metabolic adaptation, I want to expand that definition to everything that we've mentioned in this podcast, not just, I'm going to maintain my NEAT. It's like other stuff too.
I think that's really well said, because it might sound to some people like you've just said, no one has an excuse for not kind of coming in condition or whatever, like elite condition of like someone like I said, Brett Freeman or Alberto Nunez.
Yeah.
But the key thing you mentioned there is like the pragmatics of it, like what happens when someone, like you might be able to get to the same level of body fat as that individual if you like push yourself hard enough, but what else are you sacrificing alongside?
Yeah.
Which is the sport of bodybuilding. So if you lose your training quality, you lose muscle mass or your fullness, you just look like a sack of potatoes on stage. Like you might be really lean, but if you can't show off the kind of the quality of the muscle or what have you, then like you're not going to be competitive. So ultimately, to get to like that elite condition, there is an element of genetics that even goes into that, even if you can get to that body fat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a complex, like genetics are super complex. So it always riles me up when someone's like, it's not my genetics that made me look like this at all. It's all my hard work. I'm like, it's like, there's a strong amount of like
it's
foundational
mostly your genetics. If you're a natural bodybuilder, it's mostly your genetics. Like people can just pretty much do any training protocol and it's just your genetics. Like if you could put a number on it, it is super, super high. Like it doesn't take away from anyone's hard work to admit that genetics are a big part of it. It's like, you brilliant, well done. You tried really hard, but it's just like, it's like they do dictate so much in the world of natural bodybuilding, more than so much. They dictate such a great deal in terms of, skeletal structure being an absolute nightmare for someone like me. That's just why I was like, front relaxed, cool, you've lost already. Like what?
That's me.
Just front relaxed. Like, you just look ugly as hell. I'm sorry, but you just do not have,
that tiny waist.
What's his name? Buchanan? Is he the one of the 70s, 80s era? Someone Buchanan. One of your followers will know him. Go and Google him. Just like 25-inch waist and then just like 50-inch chest. Unbelievable.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
You have the same issue as me then. That's always what I suffered from. Yeah. Are you still good for time for another question?
Yes. I'm actually just typing Buchanan. Go on, carry on.
I was going to come on to, because you brought up refeeds, and that was something I had as a question for you, because obviously there's been, I think, like more and more research, and probably more kind of research within the area of like bodybuilders as well has started coming out of Bill Campbell's lab for the efficacy of using them. So I wanted to know what your kind of take, because I think, different people have different takes on the studies themselves. It's not like the study was done and there was just like this clear answer. It's like, some people have kind of interpreted it to support it, or they're still like unsure about it. Where have you settled with your kind of use of refeeds, diet breaks. What do you see as the practical use of those?
Yeah. Just if anyone does want to Google, it's Brian Buchanan.
Brian Buchanan.
He is the epitome of bodybuilding. Anyway, sorry. So refeeds, yeah, it's a funny one. So we're so far, being someone who tries to start an answer from a evidence-based standpoint, and let's get away from the word evidence-based, from a study-based, from a very research focused, what's the research shown, and then we'll start using practitioner expertise to turn this into an evidence-based practice. It's super hard to start anywhere. Like you've mentioned that Campbell study, I'm not really well versed on it, and the reason I'm not is because they're so far from being useful currently. I'm like, the way I would get people to be thinking about this stuff to begin with is starting from a coach mindset, starting from to use that word, pragmatic mindset again. Who's in front of you? Why am I doing it? We have some great understanding. I did a talk maybe 4 or so years ago, around the time of the Matador study, which you'll be aware of, which I guess again is kind of in this realm of refeed / intermittent energy restriction. Like refeeds, I guess in the bodybuilding world, it's like, there's always that question, when should I do a refeed? And it's like, oh my goodness, like how there's just, you can't give this exact after this many weeks, or look at this marker and when this becomes this, which is why you employ a coach like yourself. It's just like they'll be able to help you sort of that facilitation, that guiding of this potentially is a time, let's have this discussion, these are the things we can look out for. But there's just no concrete answer you can give someone. So, within the bodybuilding world of refeeds, it's like, and I'll just quickly say, refeeds for me, you're talking like, so this is how I define it. Carb up day, we're talking about a day for instance, carb up meals, whatever, a day with higher carbohydrates. Then we've got a refeed, where really, for me, a refeed, yes, I'm not going to say anyone's wrong for saying it's a 1 day refeed. Absolutely fine. But when I did this talk about overcoming fat loss plateaus and talking about some of the research around this area, and I talk about this kind of aggressive refeeding strategies. I don't know if we ever discussed any of these sorts of things in our previous podcast together, but aggressive refeeds, talking about like 3 days, for instance, like this sort of 72-hour period where we have studies that have looked at some of the cool markers that we like to believe we know what they might mean. So like leptin and T3 and testosterone and total daily energy expenditure. Brilliant. So we know, okay, cool. If we do this aggressive refeed, if we do this kind of low fat, high carbohydrate, maintaining protein, at maintenance calories plus a little, we can impact these hormones in a statistically significant fashion in a direction that we believe to be positive. So I'll leave that there. And then we've got this diet break type scenario. So somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks. So we have these studies, a week or two at at maintenance, predicted maintenance calories, with a high predominance of carbohydrate in the diet. And again, we get some of this attenuation of some of the negative effects that we might have seen through dieting. So some restoration of NEAT, for instance. Now, the problem that we're left with is I think I can think of two. I should probably have a pen and paper next to me. I have actually, so I don't lose my train of thought. But the first one, which you only really realize when you've been in the trenches, is you do that diet break and you just remember how amazing food is. Like, you just sort of remember, my goodness, it's nice not to be hungry. My goodness, it's nice to eat all of these varieties of food. You know, you do a 1 week at maintenance or two, but you're already much leaner than when you started. So you do, like in fMRI studies, functional magnetic resonance imaging, we know that if you are dieted, if you are further away from it, if everyone's comfortable using the term of like set point, settling point, whatever, we start really wanting to eat nice foods. And so you make someone look through a little hole and it's like, oh, there's broccoli. And they go, not really that fussed on eating that. And then you put a donut there and they're like, it's like crack cocaine in their brain it's flashing. And to a significantly enhanced degree, because they're at this new low body fat level. So you remind people of that, you allow them this flexibility, whatever. So from a pragmatic coaching perspective, it's like, they have to like really go right back to, and it's great that we're in this new realm of flexible dieting. And so you don't have to be the old school chicken and rice or whatever, and tuna and broccoli, whatever. You can have good dietary variety, which is fantastic and should be heavily encouraged. But we also know that the palatability of food and taste variety does encourage us to want to consume more calories. So it is a useful tool to some extent to sometimes limit the variety of taste that you have on I'm talking contest prep diet here, like my normal audience, this would be a different message, but talking to your audience, some limitation of that can be helpful. If you're fine and dandy, your appetite's absolutely control, you're losing body fat, the life is just absolutely fantastic, cool, brilliant for you. Everyone hates you, but cool. Like the rest of us are suffering. But yeah, it's a tool that can be used by limiting those things. So there's just this issue of, okay, if we do a diet break, that's something to be aware of. Number two is, yes, we see some of these physiological changes. Now, I don't know if there's another study that was done recently that might have been Jackson Pios. But it was like an endurance athlete or something. Do you know it?
Jackson definitely did a follow-up, but I don't think I remember the one on endurance athletes.
No, cool. There was just something about it was anyway, basically they did some sort of, it was like a diet, and then there was a refeed period, and they just, I mean, it wasn't revolutionary, but just, it's great that these studies are being done. But it was like, yeah, when there was a diet break, it allowed greater training volume in that week. And
I think I remember the one. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, good. I'm not making it up then. I was a bit like, oh crap, if you've not heard of it, it's like, oh geez.
It's because it wasn't in bodybuilders. I'm like,
yeah, you don't care, right? But what we're talking about here is body composition. And so, yeah, the endurance athletes are irrelevant. But the point being is, if we do the diet break, so if we take, let's say, the new age of natural bodybuilding is like, God, You know, when I competed, it was like diet for 12 weeks. Now, if you diet for any less than 6 months, you're a lightweight. Like what? 12 weeks? Oh, good luck. Like, game over for you. You're not placing. So it's like, there's like this standard 6 months. So you're dieting for this amount of time. And we're going to put in a week diet break, and we're going to put in some aggressive refeeds here and there. And then if you can sort of imagine a curve in your head, if we are to do, the point is does doing it put us ahead of the game? That's the question that we should be asking ourselves. It's not, we know, yeah, good stuff happens, cool. But does it move you towards your goal? And it certainly doesn't in that week. So then the question is, okay, if I'm going to take my 6 months, and then I'm going to compare two people, and in the middle of it, one of them took 2 weeks off, and yeah, cool, they got some restoration of NEAT and their leptin change and their T3 change and blah, 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 blah. But the other person just kept dieting for 2 weeks. This is what we don't currently know of. Does the fact that, great, they got some restoration of RMR, for instance, like the metabolic rate was a bit higher, but like, yeah, cool. But the other person was still in a deficit, and they've got ahead of you. So you need to not only catch them up, but you then need to get ahead of them for that to have been a useful period. So the answer to the question is, physiologically, we don't know. And psychologically, research is pretty pointless, because like psychology is just, we've just discussed how different we are all genetically, and kind of discussed sort of fairly physiological realms. But then you go the psychology of the client, the psychology of the athlete, and then you go, you know, should they do this or not? And it's like you pretty much just need to do N=1 studies forevermore. And then it's just like, well, let's not bother with studies. Let's just actually just work with the person in front of us. So this is my thing with, and actually it's just made me think of one thing with female athletes, female bodybuilders, in that, you know, in my general population kind of education and talks and whatnot, I'm trying to encourage a bit more of a compassionate approach, people to take a more compassionate approach with themselves to dieting, because it just works so much better, and not hating themselves into change, and not going, oh, you know, I binged, therefore, like I always make this joke of like, oh, Martin, you know, like I came home from work on Friday and like I had a really bad day at work, and you know, my boss shouted at me, and then so I just kind of went and binged on loads of food. And then after I binged, like I was crying, and so then I cried loads, and then as I was crying, I ate some more food, and then I fell asleep. And then I woke up the next day and I was really unhappy because I binged, and then I was crying, and then I hated my life all of Saturday, and then I was crying, and then I binged on my phone. So I was just wondering, is there a supplement I should take to help? And I'm like these are almost, that's almost like a legitimate question, or like, so I'm just wondering, what macro split should I do this week? And I'm like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you? Like, something's wrong. Like, stop asking me about macro split. Stop. Should I intermittent fast today because of that situation? No, you hate your life. Like, stop doing it. You know, I've answered multiple questions this weekend, you know, about, you know, I'm really disappointed in myself. I'm really, whatever, I've got binge eating disorder, and I'm just wondering if you've got any tips for weight loss. And I just wrote, I don't know if you saw this one, but I just said, stop trying to lose weight. Like, get yourself better. Like, I just don't understand. I do get it, because it's the world and it's life and it's pressures and it's whatever. But I'm just like, I just want to sort of shake people in a loving way and be like, stop it. Like, fuck dieting. Like, it's not the be all and end all. Nobody cares. Your family don't care. No, like, They just want you to be happy and healthy. Having less body fat's not going to change your happiness. So it's like, so coming back to female clients, like on my tour talks, I was like, I do a big bit on this kind of like the menstrual cycle. We understand that it's a very different situation for females to males in terms of what happens over a roughly 4-week period. So where this ties into this discussion we're having now is like, okay, well, if you have a female client or you are a female or whatever, and you know every single month there is that 1 week where you are way more hungry, where you are and we know that metabolism, like, again, you're probably not testing metabolism, but we know that the evidence supports or shows that there's this elevation of metabolic rate in that week. And you're not going to know exactly what yours is, whether it's 50 or 100 or 200 calories more. But let's say, you know, you're roughly in a 400 calorie deficit and you roughly assume that you're going to increase your metabolic rate by 100. You could not diet in that week and therefore not hate your life as much, not fall off the bandwagon, because this is a big thing of just getting into that cycle, which just undermines any progress whatsoever. Like, oh, I don't want to take that week off because I'll be miles behind. It's like, you've been trying to diet for 20 years, Sheila. Let's try something different, shall we? We're going to only go at 75% of the pace, but we're actually going to make progress, because you're not going to hate every 4th week and then just go back to square one. So, you know, it might be that with a female client who some female clients don't have this situation. It's worth bearing in mind that you still need to work with the individual, that you can't just base on, whether they have a menstrual cycle or not. And so in this scenario, we're not trying to get a physiological advantage necessarily. We need to go a little bit slower, because that week we're undermining our progress, because every week it's just a slog. It's not an enjoyable process. Like, the whole, a man who enjoys walking will walk further than the man who just wants to get to the destination. And it's just like sort of falling in love with the process. If you're just like, cool, 8 weeks have gone by and I've just sort of enjoyed this, we keep going, we can adapt, versus, God, month 1 was a slog. Cool, let's start month 2. Like, just taking a bit longer for that reason. So that's one possible reason. It's not diet breaks per se, but it's a similar concept. And again, with a male client, you can do the same thing. If you have someone who can go into, like, there's this, I've heard you use like dig phases.
Sure.
So it's like, I'm going to put time and effort, and then life comes into it, right? Like, when I've got 4 weeks where I can really just put everything into my training and diet and like, I'm a big fan of rapid fat loss protocols. Like, I know I can do everything I need to in these 2 weeks and I'm going to achieve these results. And then I'm going to go to maintenance, and then I'm going to achieve this. Like, rapid fat loss is not great for physique people, but for other people, it's the same premise. It's like, okay, I need a week off. I can do a diet break because of XYZ, and I can push into my training quality. I can, push my volume up. I can recover a bit better. I can blah, blah, blah. And just one last thing to say with this is, like, for anyone who listens to your podcast who's like not necessarily a physique competitor, it's like, another thing I've been saying recently is, like, I always try and encourage our MNU certified nutritionists to coach people to live. Like, don't coach them to diet, coach them to live. Like, all too often people are like, oh, you need to build habits, and that's the only way you'll keep weight off. And it's like, you don't. Like, you need to build habits that are specific to living and weight maintenance. You don't have to coach any habits for fat loss. Any at all, because we know that people can lose fat doing any kind of stupid shake diet, any fad diet. They can do it. People really can flip and do it. What they need is habits and structures and environments that promote the weight maintenance side of things. And those two aren't the same things. Like, they will have obvious crossover. Eat some vegetables, do some exercise. Like, there'll be crossovers, but you actually need a different set of skills, a different environment, it's a different process to maintain for the rest of your life than it is to dieting. So actually with diet breaks, I'll often say, okay, like, goal 1, 5% of body weight. If you've got someone who's lots of body fat, they're, maybe metabolically quite unhealthy. Oh, I'm 120 kilos. And, the doctor says my BMI says I should be 66 kilos. That's literally a question I got the other day. Where do I start? And I'm like, start at 5%, because clinically that you're going to live longer because of that number. That's your first goal. Let's look at that. And as you go along this process, okay, we're going to do a diet break at 5%. We're going to do a diet break at 10%. What's life like here, Bob, at 10% weight reduced? Yeah, I'm cool, loving life, great, blah, blah, blah. Cool. 15%, 20%. What's life like? Bit hungry. I feel like I'm not seeing my friends as much anymore because I'm becoming a bit antisocial because it's hard to go out and do. And you start to learn the client. You actually help someone to live a better life, which really is what people should be doing in those realms. It's like, you're not looking to just someone to get a 6-pack and then send them off and then they just regain. It's like, what does your life look like now? Like, oh, I'm totally obsessed with food. I don't go out. I've got food anxiety. I'm kind of sort of socially anxious. I'm obsessive. Oh, cool. Like, I have no libido. I kind of wanted to lose this fat because I wanted to get a girlfriend or boyfriend and blah, blah, blah. And now, like, I just literally have no interest in the opposite sex. Like, it's like, did we win? We definitely didn't. So that's just another thing when I talk about diet breaks, is like, do that diet break and actually, have they been calorie counting? Yes. Okay, shall we try in our diet break to use a habit-based approach, a non-calorie counting approach, so that we don't end up with a client who only knows how to live calorie counting, because that sucks. Shall we use some of our diet breaks along this long process to go, let's not track these meals, let's not track these snacks, or let's not track this one meal, or whatever. How did you feel? What did body weight do in this week? Oh, actually, I sort of managed to just maintain it. Like, how crazy is that? I've never managed that before. Oh, that's fantastic. Like, there's a much greater use to diet breaks outside of like leptin, T3, blah, 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 in a coaching process that, I'm sure loads of your listeners might be competitors themselves, but they probably work with loads of Gen Pop people if they're PTs and stuff. So, yeah.
No, I think that's really well said, because I think the research at the moment is not indicating that they're anything particularly special in that regard. And a lot of it is psychological. And like you said right at the start, you're like, take your client like as a person, and are they someone who's like, I don't know, like they are that robot who's just like, I don't want, like, if you give me a like flicker of interest, I'll go wild and it will just send them down, I don't know, potentially binge eating or what have you? Or are they someone who needs this break now and then? And equally the same way, like you said there, like listening to your client in terms of taking them down, because I've had clients like more Gen Pop and like obese clients, we lost a lot of weight, and then like, I don't know, the rule of thumb would be to maintain for a period of time before we get back into dieting. But it's like you said, if they're feeling good and ready and they're happy to like keep going or what have you, then maybe you diet and you continue to go, or maybe you stop sooner because they're in a place where they're like breaking down and like life isn't good, and so you're like, right, let's take a stepping stone here and go back down, because obviously genetics play a huge factor, but then there's environment and everything else. Like, not everyone lives the same way. So I think that was well answered, because it's like, we don't have clear like black and white answers on it. It's very much like an N=1, take your client through it. It's another tool in the tool belt type of thing.
Yeah. And another thing, actually, just something you said that just made me think of this is, I recently released my rapid fat loss calculator, but it was just like iteration 1. It was just sort of helping people start to get a concept around that. And the next one that I haven't done yet is one that will then sort of try to mathematically help with when to do a refeed. And one of the premises behind that is, for me personally, I can diet a lot easier on fewer calories than would maintain my lean body mass. So if I was to do it for an extended period, I would inevitably start to lose lean body mass. And, it's worth reminding people, lean body mass isn't just muscle. We have other areas of lean body mass. So one of those that will start to happen is I will get a glycogen depletion. But once I start to become very glycogen depleted, the body is only going to, my rapid fat loss calculator is based on this, equation of what's the maximum rate that my body can give up fat to be oxidized for fuel. And any deficit greater than that has to come from other reserves. And then once I'm glycogen depleted, that's going to have to come from protein degradation. So, but my issue is, being in kind of like a moderately lean realm, but still with my bodybuilding roots, I'm like, okay, if I just want to be a bit leaner for a period of time. But now that I've found this, I hate dieting like a bodybuilder. I like dieting in a rapid fashion. What happens is I want to set my calories and I diet better and have less hunger and whatnot at a too low value. So what I then want to do, using kind of some of the research on, the ability of the body to store glycogen based on like wet weight muscle, then be able to go, if you diet at this many calories, the time period where you need to refeed is, every 6.4 days. Like, it will come out with some, stupidly accurate figure that is like, whatever, I'll round it to something normal. But that's another one in terms of these refeeds, like doing a carb up day, for instance, and then that carb up day needs to be, 10 grams per kilogram carbohydrate. And, so it will calculate those things. So again, that was just one thing that made me remember when you were saying about kind of a gem pop client, refeeds and not necessarily diet breaks, is that's another use for them of getting carbohydrate back into the muscle. Because if you do teeter on this level of, we know the leaner you get, the much greater propensity you have to lose muscle, or not much, but with every degree of increased leanness, your propensity to lose muscle is going to increase. And so therefore your calorie deficit needs to decrease. So if someone is 2 to 4 weeks out from a show and they're legitimately lean and they're in a 500 calorie deficit, they are 100% every single day losing lean body mass, whether that is from carbohydrate stores or they're losing some muscle. So, you need to be, it's 100, the end stages. This is why hardening up, to use that a very bodybuilding world term, hardening up can be a period of, 4-8 weeks of just like, I've been lean for that long. But when you're only in 100 or 200 calorie deficit, because that's all you can realistically supply the system with from, adipose tissue, it takes a whole long time to just get those last bits out, which is when, like we were talking about earlier, getting the glutes. People think, I just stay in this 500 calorie deficit. I just drop calories, I'll up my cardio. And then they just, again, another bodybuilding world, come in stringy, but not necessarily lean. It's like, you needed to diet with 100 calorie deficit for 8 more weeks. And you tried to diet in 8 weeks was most of your whole diet, me. It's like, you needed to do this for 6+ months. But that was just another thing that came into my head with regards to refeeds and stuff like that, is you might need to top up glycogen levels as a pool for lean body mass.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, particularly your last point there, because you're tracking such small amounts of fat on the scale at that point where the scale almost becomes useless as well. So it's a real kind of mindfuckery in a sense, where I can absolutely see where people push it too far because they're trying to see that scale drop. Whereas actually it's like you're almost looking for a look at that point. And as a bodybuilder, that's where refeeds can be handy, because you do get that top off of glycogen stores, maybe a down regulation of stress, and you kind of get a bit of a peaking effect. And so you get that practical value from kind of that refeed, or maybe if you take a week diet break at that point, it becomes more practically relevant, whether or not it's having all the other benefits, which we haven't got good data on bodybuilders being that lean for that long. So we're probably never going to get that data, unfortunately. But Martin, this has been fantastic. I don't want to keep you for too long, otherwise I could just take you for the rest of the day. I know you've got things to do, you're a busy man, and I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on. I think people will really enjoy this. I'm sure they will, and they'll start bugging me to bring you back on, hopefully less than 2 years. We'll have to see though. If people want to, if they're not already following you, where's the best place they should head?
Martin Nutrition is my Instagram handle, and also I think similar on Facebook anyway, but I spend a lot of time on Instagram if people want to reach out and those kind of things. And then, like I said, Mac-Nutrition Uni is the nutrition course. And then like my podcast, Not Another Nutrition Podcast, if people want sort of tidbits. They're quite they're shortish episodes and on a variety of topics. I've started doing a few nutrition, parenting, all sorts, wisdom-esque ones, so quite eclectic mix on there. But yeah, if people are interested, that I'm easy to find on the internet. I spend most of my time.
I've been enjoying the podcast actually, because sometimes, I don't know, Danny Lennon, Sigma Nutrition is great, but sometimes you want something maybe a little bit of an easy listen, but still feels educational. And I'd say there are some on there that they're very educational, but some that are a bit more of a just easy listen to have in the background. So I definitely recommend that. For your listeners, I would just say it's just like, I get so many negative comments on YouTube, just like, because my podcast is like, I'm not trying to sell anything. It really is just a hobby. I just thought, do you know what? People ask me all these questions, and I'm there like trying to record a 15-second Instagram story video, giving them an answer, or like it'll be 4 videos, minute long. And I was like, do you know what? I'll just record a 5, 6, 10, and then as people have heard from this podcast, I end up talking. I talk a lot. So it might turn into it turns into a decent-ish 20-minute answer. But likewise, I'm just chatting. Like, I'm just chatting to my followers. I know lots of my followers, lots of them following me for 5, 10 years. And, I go off topic. I have, lots of people say, I love it. It's like a coffee shop feel. I do it when I'm, doing the dishes, or when I'm doing my steps or my cardio or whatever. Like, so don't go there with like pen and paper. Like, people are just like, you took 7 minutes until you actually finished that point, and I am not happy with this free educational material. Like, what you need to do is have a specific beginning, middle, and end of your podcast. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It's like, this is a free podcast. Go somewhere else. Like, do my nutrition course. It's really freaking good, and it's got a start, middle, and end, and some homework you can do. But anyway, so yeah, it's supposed to just be a bit of a feel-good thing, a few jokes, but hopefully helpful. Like, I love the feedback that I get from it mostly. So yeah. Well, I enjoyed it a lot, and I recommend it to others. You've kind of got the lowdown of what it's going to consist of, so you can't give Martin any bad comments. Any hate. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for listening, and we'll catch you soon. Take care. Thanks very much.